with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, I got to tell you, man, trade is just absolutely everywhere. And not just with the U.S. and China, but, I mean, what's going on in Europe right now with Brexit in the U.K. and in the European Union? I mean, this thing is, talk about topsy-turvy. This is really a crazy situation. Prime Minister May doesn't seem to be getting it done over there.
No, she could be, well, I think she's in trouble. It's obvious she's in trouble. But if you look at Europe as a bloc right now, I mean, you've got a pretty crazy place going on. You have France is rioting. You have Britain's trying to figure out whether they're in or out. Brussels is trying to rule to everybody. Italy's in big, big trouble. We don't know what's going on in Spain, and that's just on Tuesday. You know what I mean?
And Merkel is, she's fading. She's fading fast.
Merkel's going to be out because they got all sorts of problems there. So I'd say this is a very interesting time.
And it looks like, Germany's about to change direction.
Yep.
And, boy, we're going to talk about what's going on in France because that is really some crazy stuff. But, hey, what's going on in our country? And I got to tell you, this U.S.-China thing, I mean, they made the announcement. I remember I got up Sunday morning. First thing I did was wanted to see what happened there at that big-time dinner in Buenos Aires between President Trump and President Xi. And, hey, look, basically they punted, right? Let's punt. They got this huge mess on their hands, and they both know it. But I lived in Asia for more than 20 years. It's all about face.
Exactly.
It's about face.
Exactly.
It's about face. And they're trying to figure out how to save face in this whole thing. And, they're going to work it out. I really believe that. And both sides are going to claim victory in the end. And, you're going to have to read the tea leaves and kind of see what's going on behind the scenes. We won't really know until they make the final announcement. But I believe both sides are working hard right now. They got to. Because this president measures himself by the success of the stock market, and the stock market's getting hammered. And whenever there's an inkling that something positive with China and U.S. might happen, the market responds. Wow. And it jumps up.
It did right away.
But then,
very next day.
But then the next day when, China said, hey, look, we didn't agree to all that stuff. Well, it gets hammered.
It was part of that. And also Mnuchin came out and made a statement, and he used the word, this is how words are so important, if. The word if. He used if, in fact, we can get this deal through with China on the extension of not having tariff. If that can happen, if they'll really do it. He said it like 2 or 3 times. Freaked a lot of people out. And what do you mean if? The president said it's going to happen. Well, maybe if isn't the way we want to go, and that started a revolution on Wall Street.
Well, the problem is that, it depended who you spoke to in the administration, but they all had a different spin about what happened in Buenos Aires. Hey, look, we got a wonderful guest coming on with us right now. Iain Murray. He's been with us before from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and he's the author of 2 best-selling books, The Really Inconvenient Truths, and this one, Rich, I really love this one, Stealing You Blind, How Government Fat Cats Are Getting Rich Off of You.
I got to get that one.
Well said.
I like that one. That's a great title.
Iain, welcome to Made in America.
It's great to be back with you, Neil, and yes, my book is still available at Amazon.com.
Well, very good. What a concept. Fat cats of the government stealing us blind. Yes. Well said. I'm sure it's a great read. Go out there, get it. Amazon. They got a lot of great books out there, including mine, Conscientious Equity. So you can go out there and buy Ian's and my book there for Christmas and make a lot of your friends happy.
and they'll understand things better.
Yes.
That's what it'll be. It'll be helpful.
So, Iain, I got to tell you, I don't know what happened in Buenos Aires. I don't know what happened between the President of the United States and President Xi of China. And if you listen to what President Trump said, and then you see what the China government is saying, and then you see what the people around the president are saying, I mean, what really happened? I mean, are we on the path to maybe working this out, or is this like smoke screens and mirrors, and both sides are still so far apart?
Well, I think that the main thing that we know is that things aren't getting worse, and that has to be celebrated. We do know that there's going to be a 90-day truce. No new tariffs are going on either side for 90 days, and China, it seems, has agreed to look at some of the United States' main complaints about Chinese trade policy, so very valid complaints about things like theft of intellectual property and so on. So I think what we're seeing is that both sides have agreed to step back for a second and perhaps see if there is an opportunity for an agreement. I don't think we're anywhere near an agreement yet, but at least we've got this truce whereby things just aren't going to get worse for a little while.
So at least we can embrace the fact that there's a truce, and how that manifests itself, could be the substance of whether the market goes up or down. I mean, I just find it amazing, Neal and Iain, that a simple one day everything is just wonderful, and the very next day is it's terrible. We're down 1,400, we're down 600, and it's all because of it's the words that people are saying. It's having such an effect, and for me, I think it's important that people just listen to the words, understand them, and then take a deep breath. Because don't you tend to think, Neal, that we're somewhat overreacting on this?
Iain, are we overreacting? Because, I mean, these are some really big issues here. And I got to tell you, I think that both presidents realize it, and they both realize they got a problem. And, they can't. I mean, I lived in Asia for many years, and I know that, the Chinese, they like to do things behind the scenes, and they don't want to be confrontational, and they want everything to kind of be, very respectful, and let's kind of work this out behind closed doors. And then you got President Trump out there, everything's a tweet, right? I mean, he's negotiating in front of the whole world. How do you get those two sort of styles together, or can you?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question here, whether we can actually get some sort of deal with these two very different negotiating styles. I think that one thing that we saw very early in the president's trade policy against China was that things that are very highly targeted against Chinese the Chinese bad actors, especially the telecommunications companies that are stealing so much technology.
And then Iain, really there's this report out today that Canada is just taking someone into custody from one of the technology firms in China, and the U.S. wants her to be extradited to the United States. I mean, yes, how big is that?
Financial officer of Huawei. Yes, I think this is a very interesting move, because we saw early in the president's trade policy with China that the telecom company ZTE almost collapsed, and then the president stepped back and imposed general tariffs rather than the really targeted tariffs that were going that were really hitting those bad actors. So I think that this news out of Canada is an indication that they might actually be going back towards that highly targeted strategy, and I think that highly targeted strategy is going to be good for both sides. China can rein in its bad actors without having to worry about all the legitimate Chinese businesses that are putting supplies that American importers then use as inputs into their own industries and so on. And hopefully China will then start buying soybeans and so on again. So the massive dislocation that's happening in the Midwest with the collapse in soybean exports, that can be dealt with, and then we can be back on the road towards 5% growth every quarter again.
Well, that would be good. It would appear that, in a symbiosis, which is how I look at this whole thing between ourselves and China, that each party gets something from the other that makes sense. I don't think China wants to see us, and I don't think we want to see China to the point that we can't make something work because as Neal pointed out, everybody wants to save face. Everybody wants to look right on this. And it would appear that we don't want to collapse each other's economy because then nobody wins.
Oh, that's absolutely the case. As I believe you said yourself, Neal, nobody wins from a trade war. Nobody in America is winning a trade war if Americans are losing their jobs as a result of tariffs, and that's happening across the country. You know, the GM's plant closures, they tried to step back from blaming tariffs, but when you have a $1 billion increase in the price of your main input, steel and aluminum, then that's clearly going to affect your business.
Hey, Iain, do you have a moment to come back? I want to get your thoughts on Brexit and what's going on there.
Sure.
I'm sure that you're very well connected to that. Can you join us? Can you keep with us for a couple of more minutes?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to.
Iain Murray from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We're going to talk about Brexit. We're going to talk about yellow vests. I mean, what's a yellow vest? You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we have joining us right now Iain Murray from the Competitive Enterprise Institute and author of the two best-selling books, The Really Inconvenient Truths and Stealing You Blind, How Government Fat Cats Are Getting Rich Off of You. So, Rich, you and I spoke earlier today about yellow vests and President Macron of France. I mean, wow, what a mess does he have? I mean, I don't know how he's going to work this out. I mean, apparently there's going to be much bigger demonstrations in Paris and the ones that have already occurred last week. And I mean, that was some horrible stuff. I mean, some very, very horrible stuff.
Oh, no, it got very violent, and I haven't seen that for a while. It's terrible.
And it's because, why? It's because of a carbon tax.
Right.
It's because of a carbon tax.
Right.
The French people have said, hey, look, not on our backs. Not on our backs.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
And it was over a tax on gasoline.
Fossil fuel, gasoline and diesel.
Right, on the backs of the French people.
Diesel is used very often over there.
And President Trump, what does he tweet? He says, well, that's exactly why we pulled out of the Paris Accord. There's a number of countries that are really committing egregious ecological disasters with what they're doing within their economies and what they're doing within their factories, and you want us, the American taxpayer, to have to pay for all of the big mess that they're creating.
Right, exactly.
And he said, no, we're not going to do that.
Exactly. And Macron's rating right now is down to 18% as of today.
I think that's lower than Nancy Pelosi.
That it was. It could be. I think he dresses better. I don't know. 18%. The students are going crazy now. Students are up in arms about the whole thing. He's got 89,000 security forces on the streets of Paris, and they closed the Eiffel Tower.
Oh my goodness!
So how do you like that?
That's crazy stuff.
Terrible.
So, Iain, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, please untangle Brexit in about 60 seconds or 90
really?
seconds. We'll give you. And then tell us about yellow vests. I mean, how do you say? I mean, you're British. I mean, you
yep.
Educated. I mean, very well in the UK, and I'm just watching Prime Minister May and everything that she's trying to do, and she can't win. I mean, it's just like both sides now are beating her up relentlessly.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the trouble was that she I think the problem with Prime Minister May is that because she voted Remain and campaigned for Remain, she's never really understood why people voted to leave. Now, she should have been able to do so because it was on the side of every campaign boss in the country: vote, leave, take control. The idea was if you voted to leave, the British people would take back control of their laws from Brussels. So that would enable them to set all sorts of different laws from the ones that Brussels has imposed, whether they be about immigration or about regulation or fishing rights or anything like that. Unfortunately, because she misunderstood what the vote was about. She thought it was purely about immigration. And so she went she negotiated a deal which cut off immigration from the European Union, but left Britain completely within the European Union customs area, means that that Britain would continue to take all of Brussels' economic regulation. So the only benefit that from her deal would be for Leave voters would be reduced immigration from the European Union. But Leave voters were only partially interested in immigration. They wanted to take back control of all their laws. So the Leave voters are hopping mad. They see that this deal has basically turns Britain into an economic vassal state of the European Union. The Remain voters are saying, well, look, if you wanted to remain within the European Union, at least economically, at least stay in under the old system, whereby you have a voice in what laws were passed in Brussels. Not a very big voice, but nevertheless a voice. And there are a bunch of other people who want the entire question reopened and sent back to the people in a second referendum, which of course would completely abrogate the point of having had the first referendum. So she's stuck in this area where she has pleased nobody except the European Union, and that's not really a very tenable position for a British Prime Minister to have.
Well, isn't this amazing? How long ago did the British folks vote on this idea of Brexit?
That was in the middle of 2017, right?
2016. It was in the summer of 2016.
So what is the average Brit thinking about this? I mean, they're watching this whole thing. There's 5 days of debate. Many of the ministers are asking her to push off a vote that's coming up in the next few days, and she doesn't want to do that. She says we are going to vote on this when we were supposed to vote on this. I mean, the average Brit must be concerned.
Well, the average Brit wants this all to be over. If the vote was 52% to leave, 48% to stay. The latest poll I've seen has exactly those same numbers. So yes, Britain is a divided country, but the majority is clearly in favor of leaving.
Hey, Iain, thanks for being on the show, man. We really appreciate it. Iain Murray from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We got coming up Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. We're going to talk about the November job numbers. They're looking pretty good. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Roffman. Hey, Rich, Iain really gave us a great summary of Brexit and the remains in the leaves. Remains in the leaves.
I just got to tell you, this is a Monty Python. This is a debate that you have two different sides that are very passionate about what they're doing. And the vote was taken so long ago that the British folks are looking for some resolution. And can you imagine not knowing whether you're going to be part of the EU or you're going to be in the EU, you're not part of the EU, you don't know where you're going to have, the ability to travel easily or not travel easily. Talk about upsetting as things are here occasionally. That's got to be totally nuts.
Well, what Iain said, it was at 52%
to 48,
people,
52 to 48.
52 said leave, 48 said remain. And now there are people out there, and I'm sure it's in the remain
Which was an
group,
upset.
Which was an upset.
Yeah.
But 52 to 48 is a pretty clear victory. And, so imagine that, though, if you're the part of the 52. We won fair and square.
Yep.
Right? We won fair and square. And now they're saying, well, let's do it over. Let's do it over. Let's just invalidate, that whole sort of thing that we did in 2016. And, hey, look, let's just do it again.
Well, wait a minute. That's sort of like Broward County.
That's kind of that. Well, that's not
Brenda
democracy.
Snipes. That's Brenda Snipes. That's the way it goes. In those
decision
things.
Has been made.
Yeah.
And then there is the yellow vests. Hey, we're going to get back to that.
We have to discuss yellow vests.
We got to get back to that.
Absolutely.
Hey, but let's talk about job numbers and something really, really positive here. Jobs. I mean, I'm an employer, nearly 700 employees. Let me tell you, to find people today, it's almost impossible. Everybody that's got a pulse rate has got a job. So I don't know when they add new jobs, I don't know where these people are coming from, because it looks like everybody's got a job. Hey, we're very pleased to have on with us right now, Rich, Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. Hey, Mark, welcome to Made in America.
Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
So tell us, what November jobs? I mean, what's the takeaways?
Well, I think that the job market continues to perform quite well, particularly from a worker vantage point, getting to what you just mentioned. And so, we are sitting here as we speak at a time of tremendous financial markets volatility, a great deal of volatility in the political environment, not only in the United States but elsewhere around the world. And yet the U.S. job market continues to perform quite well. So you might say that everybody's sort of working through all that other stuff. I think the issues in the markets have more to do about fear of the outlook than anything else, but that's another conversation that we might get into. But in terms of the November report, we've averaged 211,000 jobs added a month over the past 12 months. The outlook is that we'll see some slowing over the next year by virtue of our just completed Bankrate quarterly economic survey. And by the way, the economists, 4 out of 5 of them said the downside risk predominate over the next 12 to 18 months. But for this one report, I think we'll continue to see solid hiring, unemployment rate that probably sticks right around 3.7%. And then, of course, I think ultimately the bigger question is, do we see some acceleration further in wage gains, where that has been sort of the sad trombone part of the economic expansion story?
Well, I think you're right on everything you just said, and it is very the numbers are just wonderful to look at right now. So let's factor in a second. The market took a very, very big hit this week. It quite possibly has wiped out all growth for the year, which is unfortunate. And then out of the blue, we heard the other day that General Motors is going to let go about 14,000 folks in jobs and shutter some plants, and they've had some problems. They're not selling their cars the way they did. They have to retool. They have to rethink. They have to redesign. How do you think that's going to play in over the next few months? And is that just the tip of the iceberg, or is that a hybrid, so to speak? So,
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the criticism that GM is coming in for. I understand the frustration. But GM is not a state-owned enterprise, despite the fact that it did receive the bailout that kept, an estimated 1 million jobs intact. GM is trying to anticipate further disruption in the marketplace, reacting to what it's already seeing, in the sense of we're seeing double-digit sales declines in sedans and double-digit sales gains, essentially, for SUVs and trucks. The consumer doesn't want the same vehicle that GM's been making for so many years. So I say, if you don't want to bail out again, then applaud GM for trying to transition to the marketplace of the future. And there is the globalization piece. GM is a shareholder-driven company as well. It has plenty of stakeholders that include, in a sense, all taxpayers, but also its workers and its management and everyone in between. And there's the part that has to do with the model of the future, where I'm guessing that car ownership is not going to be as common as it once was, because there are all these other options that obnoxiously here in D.C. now include people going around on these electric scooters. So it's like you've got gnats all about your ears while you're trying to drive down a busy thoroughfare. But that gets to the point that you've got Uber, Lyft,
they're everywhere.
Transit. Yeah,
Mark, these scooters, we just wrote about it in my magazine. They're all over Coral Gables. They're all over Fort Lauderdale. I mean, you're right. This is like a whole new world in terms of transporting oneself.
Made in China, by the way. And GM is anticipating and reacting to what's been happening. So to the question that's more about the November jobs report, I think that it's better to think right at this very moment about the economy in terms of disruption and innovation than it is about focusing on the inevitable recession, because we know there are economic cycles, but what the most dynamic piece is right now is the innovation and disruption that ultimately also produces opportunity for workers, for businesses, and investors.
So, Mark, the stock market, I mean, it's taken a major hit. The gains have been wiped out. We're in December. We're coming to a close. Can't believe where this year has gone, but, it's about to wrap up in a few weeks. So what do you think is the final prognosis on 2018? What did we accomplish? What didn't we accomplish? And this president, has always gauged himself on the stock market, and we ended up the year flat. Does that mean his presidency's flat?
Well, I would say that be careful what you wish for, because if you take credit for stock market gains, then you have to take the blame for the decline, even though both of those premises are faulty. However, I would say that I think some of the declines we've been seeing recently are predicated on the uncertainty that's associated around U.S.-China trade. And even if you're a huge fan of the president and the, dare I say, strategy that the administration's taking on trying to resolve the issues with China that we know are significant on all kinds of different issues, there's no disputing the fact that this was a very poorly messaged summit, to the extent that, you had people correcting themselves all over the place for basically 48 hours straight about what was and wasn't agreed to, including, for example, when the timetable of the 90 days began, where Larry Kudlow said something in a briefing where basically they sent out an email correction some 12 hours later. So, markets don't like uncertainty, and they particularly don't like messages that are hard to distill. So if you were to connect the lack of effective messaging from this discussion, and I'll leave it to your audience and you to decide whether you should or shouldn't make that connection, but if you connect the competency of the negotiation with the messaging, then you become very concerned, because you're saying, do these people actually know what they're doing? And yes, you did have what seems to be, and we'll see what happens with Congress, you did have a resolution of the NAFTA issue, and I guess we'll just keep fingers crossed to hope that there is something that is a semblance of a resolution of the U.S.-China trade, if not within 90 days, continuing to kick the can down the road, because I think most observers believe that these issues are so complex. It's going to be very difficult to tie every one of these strings up into a bow in 3 months' time.
Hey, we've been listening to Mark Hamrick. He's going to stay with us. You don't want to miss this. Mark Hamrick from bankrate.com, also a previous radio guy. I guess you can hear that in his voice.
Very good.
Very good.
Yeah, very good.
And he's giving us context of what's happened economically in 2018. And we're going to switch gears and talk about 2019. You don't want to miss this. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman, and we have joining us right now Mark Hamrick, who is the Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for bankrate.com. Well, Mark, we just talked about 2018. So what are your projections for 2019? And as you said, the tariffs have really wiped out whatever gains we had this year. Will there be a resolution to where this market could really take off, or are we going to continue to be kind of in this straitjacket of uncertainty? And uncertainty is very bad for business. I'm a manufacturer. I need to know what's going on. I need to get orders placed. I need to get my supply chain down. I got to do that several months out in advance. And right now, I don't know if I should buy or sell or what I should do. This uncertainty is driving a lot of people nuts, driving the markets nuts, and the president must know that. And if he's tying his presidency to the stock market, if he wants to see his numbers go, he'd better get this thing resolved.
Well, I think that's well said, and ultimately I don't think we actually know what he regards as are the top priorities, but he clearly has associated himself with the success of the stock market that was resulting from or came after his election, and so but I think that uncertainty and volatility is here to stay, and it's not necessarily going to warm anybody's holiday heart to hear that when we get into 2019 we're going to still be stuck with global issues, right? Whether it's U.S. Russia, U.S. China, U.S. EU, U.S. Great Britain, none of those go away. And we all have to I'm not going to say we all have to get along, but we all do have interconnectivity with respect to financial markets and economies. And the issues that we're seeing in the United States and in the EU and other locations around the world are associated with, to some degree, income inequality, where people sort of see the rich getting richer and many of the others not so much.
Mark, how much is this use rich getting richer and all that? We've been talking about the yellow vests today and what's going on in France. And boy, that's a revolt. That's a revolt against the rich getting richer and taxes. And then you see what's happening in the UK with the leaves and the remains and what in the world's going on there. And Merkel, who was the sort of the leader of the bunch, she's on her way out. It doesn't look good for her. How much does that impact us?
It affects us a lot because, we've had a diminution of the middle class in our country for decades to the extent that they have not partaken in the same wealth effect that, let's say, the uber wealthy have. And so what does that do within the context of politics and economies? Well, we know that it usually doesn't end well, not that it needs to, quote-unquote, end, but along those lines, you think about the great story of American success in the post-World War II era. That had to do with shared experience and shared vision for the future, and a lot of that had to do with, frankly, men fighting side by side in the trenches and coming home and realizing that I might have racial differences with my colleague in the military, but I realized on the battlefield that those differences didn't matter. And the same goes with the wealthy or well-to-do or well-heeled or well-educated fighting alongside someone who's from a blue-collar background. And so one of the unintended consequences of President Nixon ending the draft was that went away, right? And the other part is, this is getting way off, but that you have never-ending wars where you essentially outsource all volunteer force. Thank God for the volunteers, but if it's not my son dying, I might be willing to send people off to battle where I don't face that risk. And so then you also have the financial follow-ons that have to do with trillion-dollar deficits to pay for those things. So there are a lot of moving parts within all of that, and that gets back to the original point is volatility in markets, volatility in economies, and volatility in political systems. And so I do worry about that lack of presence of the U.S. middle class because whatever Donald Trump represented, and a lot of it had to do with ultimately something that Barack Obama came to office on, and that was the hope for change. I don't think the income inequality or diminution of the middle class part is going to go away. And so then you have the other political extreme, meaning the left, where, again, the interests of the middle class may or may not be well attended to. And so I don't think it's healthy for our country to have this kind of political whipsaw thing, but it's a natural consequence where essentially you have the ongoing fight between labor and capital represented in the vote.
Yeah, we probably haven't seen the end of that, have we? Hey, Rich,
that will be never ending, I think.
Never ending. We're going to pick that. We're going to pick that up here in a second. Rich has been dying to make a comment on that. So, hey, stay with us. We've just been joined with Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. Rich and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day. Rich is sitting here bursting at the seams to get into discussion. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruff. And Rich, hey, look, I know this is a very passionate topic for you, but the whole thing that's going on in Europe, and the whole it's sort of like class warfare, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
The whole thing. And let me tell you, what's going on with this next presidential election in the United States is going to be the same. I can't imagine how ugly this is going to get. Capital versus labor. Look at what's happening in Europe right now. It's boiling over. It's boiling over.
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, for the next 2 years, we're going to see the ugliest politics that we've seen in modern history. It's already starting right now with the Democrats lining up on Jerry Nadler, who's going to be heading the Judiciary Committee, and he's already laying out a groundwork for impeachment and for investigation after investigation after investigation. So I think,
let me tell you,
you're right.
If I were a Republican right now in Congress, and you have Nadler, whoever, but now Pelosi is very much distancing herself from that. I mean, she's smart. I mean, I got to hand it to her. But some of the other Democrats, the more progressive, the Maxine Waters school of Democrats.
Mm-hmm. The Al Green, Maxine Waters,
they can't wait
Booker.
for it. They can't wait for it. But let me tell you, if I was a Republican in Congress, I'd say, please bring it on, because that's going to turn off the American people like nothing before. And the reason that they took over the House of Representatives is because they put up candidates who wanted to go to Washington to get things done. They want to get things done. They didn't want to be part of this impeachment thing and endless investigation type of thing. They want to get things done. Those districts will flip. Like very quickly, as soon as the next election, as the Democrats get mired down in this sort of vengeful sort of political game. So very crazy stuff. But the whole class warfare thing that we're seeing happening in Europe right now, boiling over in France. You see the thing that's going on in the UK right now of the Brexit movement and getting out of the European thing and this sort of open border, progressive globalization, just whatever we have, come over here and, we're just going to share all of our hard work and wealth that we've created with people who have contributed nothing. And people are getting resentful of that. People are getting very resentful. People are getting resentful of politicians who just want to tax them. And let me tell you,
but that's the mantra for the Democrats.
Because we don't like fossil fuels, we're going to tax you until you don't want to buy fossil fuels anymore. But hey, wait a second. That's my life. That's how I heat my home. That's how I drive. That's how I take vacations. That's how I enjoy life.
Neal, this
take that
week,
away from me. What else do I have?
They are taking that away from them because in California this week alone they passed a law that future homes that they're building must be solar powered. You must have part of your energy usage solar power in your home. They just passed that. That's happening. They're mandating. The lefts are mandating these things.
Because the technology is really not there. People are going to end up spending $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 more on a home. And people just won't have homes. And people will be renting because they can't afford a home. Isn't the one thing that you could say is the example of the American dream is owning your home, right? That is the thing that you hold so dear and you cherish so much. Is owning your, where you have your most equity.
Post World War II.
What you accumulate, the wealth you accumulate in your life is mostly in your home. It's just so, it just cannot be detached from the American dream. So how can you make it so much harder to achieve home ownership? That's what they're doing. They're making it so much harder. In other words, they're taking the American dream. The way that you have to accumulate wealth, instead of paying rent, you pay your mortgage. You build up your equity in your home. But if you can't own a home anymore because they're too expensive to own, because of this sort of legislation, you're really taking the American dream away from the people.
Well, that's exactly correct. But you still have these crazies out there. I mean, look at AOC up in Bronx and Queens. That's Ortiz. And she made the comment the other day that when we finally have 100% renewable fuels, we'll be eliminating racism in the country. So she was linking. I mean, I'm listening to this stuff and I'm thinking, oh, my God, how can this be? How can you take anyone like this seriously? But they're linking the idea that if we have renewable fuels, we equalize everybody. Everyone's on the same playing field, and therefore racism will somehow miraculously go away. I'm telling you, do your homework, folks. Listen, look her up. You'll see the quotes that she had. Her quotes are hysterical. It's going to be a very strange 2 years. Very, very strange 2 years.
It's funny. Oh, my goodness. But, Rich, boy, it went fast today.
Man, it flew.
But unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.